does cutting saturated fat actually prevent heart attack? Saturated fat is the kind of fat found in butter, red meat, cheese, coconut oil, the kind of stuff we've been warned about for decades. But the USDA's new inverted food pyramid just put saturated fat back on the menu, saying they're ending the war on saturated fat. And they might be onto something because of two meta-analyses that came out in 2025. One that said there was no benefit to reducing saturated fat, and another that said there may be. So which is it? I'm Calvin, a video producer, and in this episode, my co-host, John, who is a data scientist, is going over both of those meta-analyses and the trials behind them to see if the evidence holds up.
Okay, so at the beginning of this year, our new dietary guidelines came out from the USDA and HHS, and in it, they included a new visualization of what you're recommended to eat, which was like this inverted pyramid. And there was a lot of talk about whether they would not include this recommendation to reduce dietary saturated fat, because that had been in the guidelines before, but they had made, the administration had made lots of statements about how they're going to end the war on saturated fat. And so most people thought it would be not included in this updated guidelines. But actually, if you read the guidelines, you still see that they recommend reducing your dietary saturated fat to no more than 10% as a percent of daily calories.
What was it previously?
It was the same. It was the same recommendation. But the visualization of the guidelines, which is that inverted pyramid, they show lots of foods that clearly would contain a lot of saturated fat, and you can't really create a meal using the foods in the pyramid and stay under 10%. So it's kind of this mismatch between the visualization and the language as it was presented compared to what is actually in the longer guidelines.
Right.
So I thought, since it's been in the news, we could look at two meta-analyses that both came out last year. One of them was cited in the guidelines. The other one wasn't, because it came out after the guidelines were finished.
Right.
So that one came out at the end of 2025, but the guidelines were finalized a few months before that. So the previous one that came out, I think, in April 2025, is included as a reference. So I think it's just would be good to look at these meta-analyses and what they actually show, and what the evidence states there. And I do just want to point out that these are meta-analyses of randomized controlled trials. So we're only going to look at that. Only the randomized controlled trials of reducing dietary saturated fat and its effects on what I'm calling these hard outcomes, like cardiovascular mortality, myocardial infarction or heart attack, and all-cause mortality. So that's kind of what we'd want ideally, because they're actual outcomes. It's not some, marker along the way in the chain that we think is going to affect these outcomes later on further down the road.
Right, it's like the bottom line.
Yeah.
Is it worth going over what saturated fats are, or is that like too basic?
We can say it.
Okay.
So we'll be talking about three types of fats generally: saturated fat, monounsaturated fat, and polyunsaturated fat. And saturated fat is generally fat that's found in animal products, like there's a lot in dairy products like butter and whole milk, also in meat. But saturated fat is also found in some tropical oils like coconut oil and palm oil. actually in pretty high amounts, especially coconut oil. And monounsaturated fat is generally found in things like olive oil and nuts. And polyunsaturated fat is found in like vegetable oils, also fish, like omega-3s, that's polyunsaturated fat. And you can say generally that saturated fats are generally solid at room temperature, and unsaturated fat, which includes polyunsaturated and monounsaturated, are generally liquid at room temperature.
Okay, that's a decent way of telling them apart, if you don't know, like me.
This is general, like, coconut oil,
it's between.
It seems to be liquid at like I don't know, maybe 70 something, but it's not like butter so much. But.
Right.
All right. So I guess the general question we're going to look at is saturated fat bad for you? And the more specific question that we can ask is, does reducing dietary saturated fat reduce the occurrence of heart attacks or cardiovascular death or death by any cause, which is that all-cause mortality? And we're going to look at these two meta-analyses that only look at randomized controlled trials on humans. And that one meta-analysis that came out in April 2025 basically said no. It was pretty unequivocal of its conclusion. It said, basically, we cannot recommend reducing dietary saturated fat.
So for the second question, as in, does it reduce any of those metrics? Right.
The hard outcomes. Yeah. So by hard outcome, I mean the heart attacks or death.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And then the meta-analysis that came out in December said, actually, yes, but it depends on who and the risk and what you replace saturated fat with. So basically it depends. And also with not very strong evidence, but at least it was definitely not a no, like the other meta-analysis.
Okay.
So I thought we could go through each one in detail and see what we can learn from them. Because which one are we going to believe? All right. So just to quickly go over what a meta-analysis is, it's just a method to combine evidence from similar studies using statistics, using some quantitative methods, and it allows us to come to more precise conclusions because we combine all the results from each study and we get much higher numbers. And of course, the studies should be relatively similar and looking at the same interventions and the same outcomes, ideally, of course. And if this is, generally at the top of the evidence hierarchy, so combining lots of randomized controlled trials. And just also to remind everybody, a randomized controlled trial is just a study that randomly assigns people to different groups so that the two groups are as similar as possible, so that the differences are balanced between the two. And that helps isolate whether whatever intervention we're looking at actually caused the specific outcome we're looking at.
Right.
Okay, so the two meta-analyses we'll look at, and I'll just look at the main conclusions right now, and then we'll go into each one in detail. The first one is Yamada. So it was actually a study written by authors from Japan, and that included 9 randomized controlled trials, and it found no significant reduction in all-cause mortality, cardiovascular mortality, myocardial infarction, and coronary artery events. And they couldn't look at stroke because there weren't enough events reported. And most of the included trials were secondary prevention studies, meaning that the people already had a heart attack in the population they studied.
Okay.
And they did mention that very few participants were on statins. And this is a quote from the study, from the conclusion. The findings indicate that a reduction in saturated fats cannot be recommended at present to prevent cardiovascular diseases and mortality. So pretty clear conclusion.
Right.
And now,
quick question.
yeah.
You mentioned stroke. Is that something typically associated with saturated fats?
Yeah, it definitely is part of the cardiovascular system. So that would be included, but they just didn't have enough trials that looked at that specific metric. So they didn't include it.
How come? Is there less focus on that?
Many of the trials included are from like the 60s, and they just didn't track that. They just didn't choose to.
Okay.
As a metric. So if you don't have enough trials that tracked that metric, then you can't make a meta-analysis from it.
So I'm just wondering why they didn't.
Some of the trials that, not in this paper, but some of the trials don't actually look at cardiovascular mortality as the main outcome, for example.
Okay.
So these are just other metrics that, like secondary metrics that they track. So it's just not all the study won't track everything, you know.
Do I get this right? That some of the RCTs had the heart attacks and heart attack deaths as secondary metrics, but the meta-analysis can take that into consideration
if the data is reported and tracked.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. It didn't
But so I'll mention that later, but like Yamada only includes trials that the outcomes were the cardiovascular metrics as the primary outcome.
Like, do they generally avoid including things that are not primary outcomes?
I guess ideally you would not include it.
Okay.
But I think sometimes in this situation they are included because there just aren't that many trials in general on this problem.
Okay.
Because it's a pretty messy problem, and the trials ideally would last many years. So it just takes a lot of money and time and resources to do one of these trials. So there just aren't that many.
Okay. Regarding the stroke, are strokes less deadly than heart attacks?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why they focused on it less.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
All right.
Okay, so now let's look at Steen's overall conclusions. And this one included more trials, but it kind of did subgroup analyses where it looked at the replacement nutrient, so replacing it with polyunsaturated fat or monounsaturated fat separately. So there were more trials included, but looking at the overall groups where they didn't divide them by the type of fat replacement, they did find no significant reduction in all-cause mortality, cardiovascular mortality, non-fatal myocardial infarction, and stroke. However, when they looked at replacing saturated fat with polyunsaturated fat, they did see a significant reduction for non-fatal myocardial infarction. So that's like a non-fatal heart attack. But all of the other ones were still not significant reduction.
That's odd.
We'll go into that in more detail.
Okay.
Later. Yeah. And in this meta-analysis, they also translated the relative risks into a 5-year absolute risk difference by looking at the baseline cardiovascular risk. And in this analysis, they found that if you have a low risk for some cardiovascular event, that 5-year risk did not show a significant benefit. However, if you're in a high-risk group, so you have a high risk for some coronary artery event, you have a high risk for some cardiovascular event, then there was an important risk reduction based on their predefined thresholds.
Okay.
I know it sounds a bit complicated, but I'll explain it a bit later.
Yeah, I think I get it, but it would be good to.
Yeah.
All right.
So their like final conclusion quote was, among persons at high cardiovascular risk, low to moderate certainty evidence was found for important reductions in mortality and major cardiovascular events, particularly for myocardial infarction, with respect to replacing saturated fat with polyunsaturated fat. So only for replacing saturated fat with polyunsaturated, not with monounsaturated or any other nutrient like carbohydrates.
Okay.
Okay, our first chart. Okay, so this is from Yamada, and I'll pull up the study in a second, but just want to explain how to read these forest plots. So basically on this column with study, you have the name of the study. That's the original randomized controlled trial. And then in this chart, we have the experimental group and the control group. So here, the experimental group means the lower saturated fat group. And for each study, you have the odds ratio, and that's represented by this bar. And the small dot or the little vertical line is the point estimate for the odds ratio. So that's like 1.4 for the top one right there. The square in the middle represents the size, basically the weight of the study.
Oh, that I didn't know.
Yeah, you see how this one is bigger and it represents 43%.
Okay.
And this one down here is just a bit smaller and it's 20%, but these really small ones are like, 0.2%. So
0.2%. At that point, why even include that?
I mean, if it fits the criteria, you should include it. But the bar that we have there is the confidence interval, the 95% confidence interval of the odds ratio.
Yeah.
And if that crosses 1, that means there's no significant reduction or increase in the effect of saturated fat on whatever metric we're looking at. And here we're looking at all-cause mortality. And actually, all of these studies, there's not even one that has a significant effect in either direction because they all cross the 1.
Right. All of them.
Yeah, but some do have a single point that's much lower, some a bit higher. Well, that's pretty high. That's up to...
Yeah, but those are like really low number of events, so...
Yeah, that's why it's very wide. Yeah, the confidence interval. And you can see that where the diamond down here, if that crosses 1, then it means overall there's no effect.
That's the overall, across all studies, outcome of the meta-analysis.
Yeah, corresponding to this odds ratio and 95% confidence interval. Okay. Just one note on this heterogeneity thing. That is more a statistical measure. I don't want to go into too much detail, but it doesn't have anything to do with like how different the design or of the study is, like, or how different like the diets were in the studies. It just has to do with more are the studies' odds ratios similar to each other based on the overall odds ratio and what variance they have. So this heterogeneity measure is not clinical or methodological, like difference in diets or replacement. It's just a statistical measure based on the odds ratios and the variance and how well they agree with each other overall.
And 13%, is that typical?
13% is pretty good. That's pretty low heterogeneity. Like if you see, I don't know, over 50% maybe, then you like start to question how reliable the results are.
Lower means there's more consensus among the studies. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. So let's go to look at the actual... We were just talking about this chart, which is the forest plot on the all-cause mortality, and everything showed no association, no effect, basically. Let's now look at the same same type of chart, but for cardiovascular mortality. You can see some studies that actually are significant in their effects, like this one, Dayton, doesn't cross the no effect line, the 1.
Yeah.
But that's the only one, really. Everything else does. Therefore, we have a point estimate that's 0.94, which would mean like a 6% reduction, but overall it's no significant effect either way.
Okay.
And so that was cardiovascular mortality, and this is myocardial infarction. So that's like a heart attack.
Okay.
And here you see some interesting things.
That is way more conclusive.
Well, it still crosses the 1 though. So
just.
Yeah, so
I mean, does it really cross? It looks from here. It looks like it's tangential.
Well, I mean, it's 1.02. You can see that on the confidence interval here.
Right.
But that is very...
You have to squint.
Yeah, and I think this is my first, like, big criticism of this paper.
Yeah.
That it was so clear in its conclusion that we cannot recommend reducing saturated fat, but then you see this result and it's so on the edge. So maybe they should have just been a bit less... they should have maybe put a caveat in that conclusion, like, but there appears to be a potential reduction that's on the borderline statistically significant. Because similar to like the p-value threshold, 0.05, there's no like magic to that 0.05 threshold.
Right.
Same thing, there's no magic to this like 95% confidence interval.
It's convention.
It's a decent convention, but like, if that is slightly different, then your conclusion could be totally different. They could they could recommend it. So
okay, but they could say that regardless of the confidence interval, even if there is a reduction, it's not a like big enough one.
That would take more interpretation.
Would it? Because it's not that, like, I'm not now just talking about if the diamond crosses the line. I'm talking about where the center of the diamond is, and it's not that far from the line.
It's 0.85, which is a relative risk of 15% decrease. That's relative risk. It's not absolute risk reduction.
Right.
And that takes more. If you want to calculate that, actually, we're going to look in the next meta-analysis. We're going to look at that briefly and how they did it. But that requires calculating a baseline risk. And
does baseline risk mean your risk of dying from heart attack, or your risk of having heart attack in a given year?
It can be in a given year, but usually it would be a longer period than that.
Okay.
Like in the next 5 years or even 10 years.
Okay, in this time period, you had this much risk, and now you have 15% reduction from that. So let's I'm just making it up. Like, let's say you have a baseline 5% risk, and then if you reduce saturated fat, according to this, you have a 15% reduction from that 5%, which is not much. It's right.
Like
4.25.
Yeah, it's like 4.25. Yeah, which is reducing absolute risk by 0.75, which is I don't think anybody would say that is a whole lot. If you want to be extra careful, maybe. But that's where it gets to be like your choice. Like,
right. And I don't know if the 5% you gave was a ballpark figure, but for many people, they'll be like, okay, I'm not, like, totally not, as you said, personal choice.
And this is a common critique of reporting just the relative risk.
Yeah, I can see why.
And not the absolute risk reduction. However, it's not straightforward to create these baseline risk metrics, because you have to you have to make assumptions in creating that baseline risk, because
Yeah, got it.
so even if you do that, it's not straightforward that is the true risk reduction. There's also the question that, okay, if you do it for 5 years, but what about 10 years? What about 20 years?
Why do risk reduction in the first place? Couldn't they just say, if it's a randomized controlled trial, this percentage of people had it in the control group, this percentage of people had heart attacks in the experimental group?
I mean, you can do that, and I can calculate that here.
Right, but why change that to risk reduction?
Risk ratio, or
whatever that number is there, 0.85.
So that is odds ratio, which let's just assume that's risk ratio.
Okay.
because then you literally would just put the percent of those who had a heart attack in the intervention group, and divide that by the percent who had a heart attack in the control group.
All right. Okay, that makes sense.
You have to compare them in some way.
Yeah.
And we're looking at this chart shows odds ratio, but it's a lot easier to explain it through a risk ratio, and which is another issue with this study, in that actually in the conclusion they say it's relative risk, but then in the study they report odds ratios. So it seems like they just mislabeled the conclusion as relative risk, but it should have been odds ratio. I don't.
Okay.
The numbers are very similar. I've recreated it. So.
Oh, great.
Look what you made me do.
I think you wanted to do this.
All right. So this is that same chart, but with risk ratio.
Okay. 0.87.
And odds ratio is 0.85. It's just very similar, but just easier to talk about the risk ratio, because like you said, can't you just do the percent who died in one versus the percent who died in the other group? Yeah, that's what this is.
Okay. But I just want to point out, their claim is less egregious if they had used the risk ratio as they say they did.
I mean, by 0.02, it's like irrelevant. Is that what you're saying? Like 0.87 versus 0.85? I mean,
yes.
Who cares? and it's the same thing.
Sure, it's not like it's completely justified versus not, but
yeah.
All right. Anyway,
the abstract clearly states relative risk, but the charts say odds ratio, and with these numbers, they're really similar.
Not a huge deal.
Not a huge deal, but
it's good to be precise.
It makes you look a bit closer at some of the charts to make sure. And it especially, if they're looking at one that has that really borderline significant, and that's their conclusion.
Okay.
I don't know. I just wish they were a bit more cautious in the language in the overall conclusion. One other thing, since we're already in the R programming, you may ask, what happens if you leave out a study? Does it change the conclusions any?
Are you just doing a thought experiment now?
I am explaining a way to test the robustness of the results.
But you just said you're supposed to include all the studies that meet the criteria.
Oh yeah, but this is just a statistical method to test how robust your results are, based on this kind of sensitivity analysis. Okay,
proceed, and if it doesn't compute, I'll ask.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is look at every result. So, for example, we'll look at myocardial infarction, and we'll redo the analysis, but leaving out this study. And then we'll redo it and leave out the next study.
Okay.
And we'll look at the overall results and see if it changes any. So basically, it's a sensitivity analysis where on the y-axis you can see the full data set on the top in the blue, and then this would be the results leaving out this study, Burr, and then the third line is leaving out this study, Loren.
Okay.
So that's the overall results and how much does it change. And actually you can see that it's still, the results are the same.
It doesn't change much.
Yeah. So this is just something that you kind of would like to see the meta-analyses do.
So
because
just
if one trial is driving the whole results becoming significant, that makes the results more uncertain, I think.
okay, I understand.
But in this case,
I mean,
we don't see that.
if the meta-analysis had like 10 trials and 9 of them had 10 people and one of them had like 6,000 people, and it was heavily weighted, and the one that was 6,000 people showed clear results and the others did not, and excluding that would make you think like, whoa, this meta-analysis is not that good because excluding that changed the results. However,
Yeah, I'm not saying it doesn't mean it's not a good meta-analysis. I'm just saying that you should be aware of why it changes the results.
sure.
Okay, here's something that might change your thoughts on the results, though. Let's look at myocardial infarction and any coronary artery event, which is figures 4 and 5. So that is this one here where we're borderline significant. So that's the myocardial infarction.
Yeah.
And figure 5 is this one, any coronary artery event. And at least in the random effects model, that is not close. In the other common effects model it is, but
What's the difference?
statistical methodology, basically.
Okay, but it's like a statistical thing and not like one of them measured something different than the other.
No, it's like, without going in too much details, generally the random effects model is the more widely accepted model that you should do in meta-analyses.
Okay.
The common effect model basically assumes that there's a single shared effect across all the studies. And the random effects means that there's like a distribution of possible study effects.
Okay.
Generally, random effects is preferred.
Okay.
So they probably should have just not reported it. I don't know why they...
Okay.
Okay, but anyway, that isn't the point of this issue. So in both of those outcomes, the myocardial infarction and any coronary artery event, if you go back to the original trial, those counts that they use are for ischemic heart disease events. And if you look at, that's this trial here, Burr, ML, right here.
Okay.
Look at these numbers.
Yeah.
132, 1018, 144, 1015, and that was for any coronary artery event. Now look at this one, and this is for myocardial infarction. Burr, 132, 1018, 144, 1015. That's the same.
Okay.
Okay. So what Yamada has said basically is that those numbers, the same number of myocardial infarctions is equal to the number of coronary artery events, which something is wrong there, because those are different things. Basically, the any coronary artery event should be broader.
The fact that they're the same numbers, is a critique by you or is a critique by the meta-analysis?
By me.
Okay.
The meta-analysis just uses the same numbers for those two metrics. The problem is the original study doesn't give you the the non-fatal and fatal myocardial infarction events. So
Okay.
they're using the same numbers for a broader metric for those two, which
That seems uncool.
it's highly unlikely that they're the same numbers. Like, it's theoretically possible, but it's like really unlikely.
Of course.
And it seems like they just did it because they don't report those numbers in the original trial.
It does seem like that, but just to see if I got it correctly,
Yeah.
for what they're saying to make sense, it would have to mean that all 132 people plus, I don't know what the other number was, who had heart attacks, essentially.
There were no other events.
Could you give an example of what would be a non-heart attack event?
Maybe something like some sort of angina or revascularization, I guess. But maybe we can look at the figures side by side. So on the left, you have figure 4, the myocardial infarction, and in the screenshot, I've got any coronary artery event there. So, you can see clearly that only for Burr, the numbers are the same. It's 132 and 144. But like for MRC, you can see in myocardial infarction, it's 40 and 39. But in any coronary artery event, it's 62 and 74. And then Rose is 16 and 5. But in Rose for figure 5, it's 21 and 10 and 36 and 44. And then 47 and 54. So except for Vijaya Kumar, but there aren't any events there anyway. But all of the numbers are different except for Burr. So something is wrong there.
So they were probably not measuring that.
No, it just wasn't reported.
Okay.
And it's clear in figure 4, myocardial infarction, that means non-fatal and fatal myocardial infarctions.
Yeah.
Which they aren't very specific about, but if you look at the other numbers, that's what it has to mean. So anyway, my conclusion is basically any coronary artery event could use the original study's counts, but that myocardial infarction shouldn't be the same number. And the original study just doesn't report that. So that's a problem with how Yamada reported it in the meta-analysis.
Okay. But if the trial didn't report those numbers, how can a meta-analysis deal with this?
You would basically just have to remove that study.
Okay. You know what I'm going to ask next?
What?
Did you already do that?
Yeah. And?
Isn't it one of those charts there?
Well, yeah, but yeah, it is. Yeah, it's this one. Yeah, because you can see it's still, the point estimate in the myocardial infarction is still below 1. So the point is below, but it does cross the 1, so it's not a significant effect. And basically, if you remove that study, it lowers the point estimate, but it still crosses 1.
Yeah.
However, it just adds to the problem of them being so, clear with the conclusion.
I get that your problem with it is perhaps them not being so, what's the word? Meticulous?
Cautious?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
However, if we look at, like, grand scheme of things, if we look at what the main question was, it's not really making a difference in your favor anyway.
Removing the study. Is that what you mean? Yeah. No,
Yeah.
That's definitely agree with that. I mean, I'm just complaining about their language.
I get that, but
their reporting.
At some point, you have to come back to the main question.
Does it reduce myocardial infarction and the other metrics? Yeah, well, I think you can arguably say it depends, and there is some evidence that it might.
Okay, but we can circle back because then I want to ask more things.
I mean, I'm arguing this in a statistician
I know.
point of view.
I get that.
I'm not arguing this in like a pro reduce saturated fat advocate.
I have no doubts about your agenda, but
yeah. Okay, let's talk about the next meta-analysis.
All right.
So this is Steen. I didn't find any big issue like potentially big issue like the counts in the other one, or the reporting of relative risk versus odds ratio. But I did find a typo in the the charts, of course. It was just some, instead of 177, they put 117, and instead of 427, they put 422.
That, like, they calculated their...
No, actually, in the table, it was the numbers are incorrect, but when they calculated the risk ratios and the results, they were correct. So I don't know, somewhere in just creating the table of the...
It is concerning level of that you went and checked.
I know. Yeah. Okay, so let me get that study. Okay. All right, so this study, right. So this study basically looked at the same thing. Does reducing saturated fat, does that reduce major cardiovascular events? And their conclusion was, for persons at low cardiovascular risk, reducing or modifying saturated fat intake has little or no benefit over 5 years. But among people with high cardiovascular risk, low to moderate certainty evidence was found for important reductions in mortality and major cardiovascular events, particularly for myocardial infarction, with respect to replacing saturated fat with polyunsaturated fat.
So they were between the two, they were the more nuanced.
Definitely more nuance in this trial. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Out of curiosity, could you remind me the government, which one was it that they cited?
They cited the previous one, the Yamada.
The Yamada one, okay.
But only because this one came out.
Yeah, I get it.
After, yeah. Just not that they're selectively.
No, I get it.
Yeah. Okay, so let's look at a few of those forest plots for this meta-analysis. This is all-cause mortality, and you can see they've divided it by replacing with polyunsaturated fat or replacing with other. And basically that's monounsaturated fat or carbohydrate. And most of these replace saturated fat with carbohydrate, but only that one with olive oil right there replaces it with olive oil or a monounsaturated fat. So this is for all-cause mortality, and similar to the previous Yamada meta-analysis, you can see no difference in the groups.
Yeah, you barely see the diamond even.
Yeah, it's pretty tight.
Yeah.
The confidence interval, yeah, you can see the numbers there. It's not too wide. So at least with this one, it backs up what Yamada...
Yeah.
It backs up Yamada's conclusion as well.
Yeah.
And then with cardiovascular mortality, we have kind of the similar thing where you see the point estimate shift a bit lower, but it still crosses the one, so overall it's not significant.
Okay.
And it's pretty similar result with both replacing with polyunsaturated fat and replacing with other nutrient.
Yeah.
The next one we'll look at is non-fatal myocardial infarction. So remember in Yamada we looked at myocardial infarction, but that one was fatal and non-fatal. This is only non-fatal.
Right.
So people who have a heart attack but don't die.
Yeah.
And in this one, you actually see for polyunsaturated fat replacement, you see a borderline significant effect,
Yeah.
but very borderline,
Yeah.
0.99.
But think if you just look at the 0.75,
Yeah, 25% risk reduction.
pretty decent.
That's not nothing. I mean, of course, it depends on then we're back to the absolute risk reduction.
Yeah, but going from 5% to 4% is something.
It's something. Yeah. And that all you have to consider all of these reductions or increases is only based on the duration of the studies.
Yeah.
And we're combining lots of studies together, so it's not clean, but none of these studies run for 40 years.
Right.
Most of them are much shorter. They're like 2 to 5, and most of them on the lower side. So if there is an effect, you'd assume that as you go longer in duration, the effect would be even more pronounced.
Okay.
Possibly compounding, but that's all, theoretic. That is an extrapolation from the data that we have.
Yeah.
And for this one, the overall does cross the 1. So overall, if you include the other replacements, then it isn't significant. There is no effect, but the point estimate is still 0.87. So there's something. There might be something.
Yeah.
Just quickly, the last figure is stroke, and you see. Actually, this is a pretty big point estimate reduction, so 0.63, but there's more variation in this one. Ideally, you'd want them all.
I know, but most of them are.
And the ones that aren't are.
They have very small weights.
Yeah, the ones that aren't are pretty small studies and have small weights, yeah. So that could be something as well.
I mean, yeah.
But still not significant, but it depends on how you want to interpret the results here.
Yeah, I'm trying not to put too much importance on statistical significance and look more in like the general direction.
Right, yeah.
Directionally, I'm leaning towards they're probably not that good for you, but from everything that we've seen, nothing is like a slam dunk that their statement was unwarranted, the government's. The guidance document doesn't change it from the past where it was, you said. It keeps it around 10. But the
below 10%, yeah.
Below 10%. So kind of like avoid it.
Reduce it. And the food pyramid, they kind of upgraded it into you don't need to reduce it as much. And based only on these studies, I don't see a problem with them doing that. Yeah, you could interpret it that way.
However, how could you interpret it in any other way based on this?
Well, I can make up. I understand what you're saying, but like there's inconsistency in their guidance to the public.
Based on what I have learned throughout my life, I can see why it's in the 10%, reduce. But based on these two studies, I can see why they would say, don't reduce.
Yeah, okay, I see what you're saying, but there is, then that's an inconsistency in what is, that is a problem in it of itself.
But how do we make our decisions based on the meta-analyses, no?
No, the document, it uses meta-analyses as one part of the evidence. There are many other lines of evidence that are looked at.
Okay.
In that.
Okay.
There's this is just one part of it.
Gotcha.
And the problem is that as you can see, it's not totally clear what is the recommended way to. It's not totally clear if reducing saturated fat leads to reduction in these hard outcomes from these trials, and that is a problem.
Right, because we don't know how they came up with the inverted pyramid. We don't know what they're basing that on.
We can speculate, but
gotcha.
It's not totally based on what is in the document, the longer document that's also put out by the same government agencies.
Okay.
Yeah, we will talk about that more later.
Okay.
Yeah. So other than these forest plots, I just want to talk a bit about how they came up with that absolute risk reduction. So they said in groups with high cardiovascular risk, so groups that have a high baseline risk of having a heart attack or something similar, how did they come to that conclusion that it was if you reduce saturated fat, that it's an important reduction in heart attack or a cardiovascular event? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So to calculate an absolute risk reduction, you have to first figure out what is the baseline risk. So they said that among persons at high cardiovascular risk, important reductions in mortality, blah, blah, blah. So that relative risk that we were looking at, the risk ratio here, that's relative, but not absolute, of course. So there's a difference. And to calculate that absolute risk reduction, we just get the baseline risk and multiply that by 1 minus the relative risk.
Okay.
The risk reduction, basically, that's. So you get that relative risk, which is like 0.86 for non-fatal myocardial infarction. That's would be that risk ratio that we saw in the forest plot.
Okay.
Then by using some assumptions, you come up with baseline risks for different groups. So like low baseline risk, medium, high, and they determined that for a high baseline risk group, there would be 85 non-fatal myocardial infarctions per 1,000 people over 5 years.
Yeah.
And that baseline risk assumption comes from a different trial that was a large meta-analysis that pulled multiple trials on statins and reported the cardiovascular event risk by baseline risk category. So It just took baseline risk from other meta-analysis.
Right.
Which is not, that's totally fine that they did that. You have to get the baseline risk from somewhere.
Yeah.
And that seemed reasonable. So they basically then take that 85, multiply it by that 86, and that becomes 73 per 1,000. So there is where you get, if you reduce dietary saturated fat, we are now expecting there to be 73 non-fatal heart attacks instead of 85 for that high baseline risk group.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And therefore, your absolute risk reduction in terms of numbers is just that 85 minus 73. So 12 fewer myocardial infarctions per 1,000 people over 5 years. Okay?
I mean, it feels like there should be a simpler way of presenting this, but yes.
There might be. And basically, that in percentage is basically...
like that.
Yeah. So basically, the percentage is... You're reducing it by an absolute percentage difference of 1.19, which is basically 8.5%. And then you calculate, you multiply that by 0.86, the risk reduction, and then you get 7.31%. And you just take the difference there to get the absolute risk reduction in percentage point terms.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. So basically, what we can conclude here is that if you're in a high baseline risk of having a heart attack and you go on a reduced saturated fat diet, your absolute risk reduction in percentage point terms is only 1.19%. Because your baseline risk was 8.5%.
Yeah.
And now it's 7.3%.
Yes.
7.31. So for an individual, is that a lot?
I mean, it might be. It's not. I mean,
it's not nothing, but
I don't want to have a 1.2% chance to have a heart attack more than I need to.
Yeah, there's that. Yeah.
But then again, that I have to weigh that against how many less burgers I'd like to eat.
Yeah, and then you also, there's so many other things that you have to weigh it with, like, okay, that's over 5 years. What about over 20 years?
Right.
And then there are other problems with, like, that risk reduction, that 0.86 here, that is all dependent on the trials themselves. And that may or may not be the true number. I mean, it's definitely not the true number, but we don't know how close it is really.
Sure.
That also assumes that the same risk reduction applies across all the baseline risk groups.
Yeah, that should not be the case.
That seems to me a bit, like you might expect if you're already in a high baseline risk group, the risk reduction should maybe be more.
Yeah.
That makes sense to me. So I don't know. I like that they tried to do this, and I think it really adds to the nuance and interpretability of this meta-analysis of the results, but it's still very uncertain, the result here.
Compared to their conclusion.
I think their conclusion is fair because actually in the conclusion...
So wait, what's your issue with it?
I don't have a big issue with it because in the conclusion, they say among persons at high cardiovascular risk, low to moderate certainty evidence was found. So they are saying it's low certainty evidence, maybe moderate.
Okay.
And at least they're saying it's not like high certainty that our numbers are, totally accurate and precise. So I think they're being as clear as you can be that this is not very certain.
So you saying that, like literally just before I said this, you said it's far from certain or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically you agreeing with the study.
Yeah. I would say it's more on the lower end than moderate.
Sure.
But I think there is low certainty evidence, that it might be an important reduction. And those important reduction thresholds were defined they were predefined thresholds. So they didn't just look at the data and say, oh, we found it's this number and that number appears important. They defined those thresholds before they did the analysis, which is good.
All right, fair enough.
So I just want to compare these two studies more broadly. And basically, I think Yamada's conclusions are too strong from the results that they show. Basically, that borderline myocardial infarction, translating that to cannot recommend reducing saturated fat. I think that's a bit too strong. There's also less detail in sensitivity analysis and things like that in the supplement that they provide. I do like that they are a bit more strict about which studies they include. So that was nice. But then, of course, then you get fewer studies. So And Steen is quantitatively more rigorous and more nuanced, so you can have a better idea yourself what to do. Like, should I replace saturated fat with, what should I replace it with? Should I replace it with, carbohydrate or polyunsaturated fat? There's at least some indication that they tried to analyze that in a more nuanced way, and they looked at the baseline risks. So I think that was good. And they treated those borderline confidence intervals more cautiously, like it's low to moderate certainty. I like that. If you look at the supplement for Steen, they have a lot of sensitivity analyses in there. I like that. Lots of different subgroup analyses, and I do appreciate that. So the main difference is just Steen is more cautious and nuanced, and Yamada is more stronger.
Okay.
But I think overall it's not totally clear still.
When you say overall it's not clear, you mean whether or not there's a benefit for reducing?
Yeah, I think there's some signal, and I want to show a chart. Okay, so this chart that I created, this is the results from Yamada and Steen, the overall results put all on the same chart together, just so it's easy to see. I did refit it using risk ratio for Yamada and a specific method to characterize the variance in the studies, but don't worry about that. Don't worry about it. Okay. So you have on the y-axis, you have the metric that we're looking at, like all-cause mortality, cardiovascular mortality, myocardial infarction, any coronary artery event, and stroke. And like the forest plots, we have the risk ratio, and if it crosses 1, it's said to be not significant effect. Yamada is the kind of dark orange color. Steen is the dark bluish green.
Teal.
Whatever. Teal. Okay, teal color. And you can see as we go into the more specific metrics, there seems to be a kind of pattern where we start to see a signal. So we start at all-cause mortality.
I was wondering about this.
We go to cardiovascular, so a more specific metric. Then we see a bit of a shift. Then we go to, now Yamada is non-fatal and fatal myocardial infarction. Steen is only non-fatal. But we see they're pretty similar, the results.
Yeah.
Any coronary artery event, only Yamada reports that. But then Steen reports stroke at wide confidence interval. But it looks like, there's this pattern that's coming up. And basically I think you can come up with this story where you have like a signal, but it gets diluted as you go to the broader categories. Let's say you assume lowering saturated fat has an effect, and that effect works through some kind of cardiovascular disease. You'd expect to see that first in some more specific cardiovascular outcomes like stroke or a heart attack, and then you'd see it less clearly in death and all-cause mortality. And many of these trials are shorter and therefore are probably seeing those separations between the groups in all-cause mortality less clearly than the more specific metrics.
Yeah.
So this is one interpretation that you can, I think, pretty reasonably tell yourself that could be the case. Obviously, we're not sure here.
I even did that in the previous one where I said, if you think of it as a funnel, some people are going to get heart attacks, some of them are going to die. And so it's like, I was explaining why I would look at the heart attacks with and without mortality as my preferred metric of these. Because it's like the first layer in the process.
Yeah. It's where you start to see the signal, yeah. And one interesting illustration of this idea is from this study, and this is back to Yamada all-cause mortality. So if you look at this one study, Vijaya Kumar, from 2016, you'll see in the control group you have 2 events, so 2 deaths out of 99, but in the experimental group you have 0 out of 99.
Right.
And that is on all-cause mortality. So those 2 deaths, and because it's this all-cause mortality, it has to be counted. Those 2 deaths were traffic accidents.
Nice.
I mean, it's not nice, but...
Yeah. Completely unrelated to the...
But and that's what it means, like, it's that these broader metrics are kind of diluted by these events that have nothing to do with, reducing saturated fat, of course, which is why you probably wouldn't see a signal in the broader events if the trials are smaller and shorter in duration. I know that's for the, in this case, it actually, for that study, it shifts the odds ratio to 0.2, like,
yeah,
very low, but the confidence interval is like really wide.
I guess, grand scheme of things, what I'm getting from this is that heart attacks or like heart-related mortality isn't that high on the causes of mortality?
You mean all the
from the all causes, heart attacks must be a small part of it.
Oh, within this
yeah,
numbers. Yeah, heart attacks is in there for sure.
Yeah, but it's like a very small slice.
I mean, very small. It depends on the study.
Sure.
But
I would have thought it was bigger and the results would be a bit closer to each other.
So the top 2?
Yeah, like if everyone who died from a heart attack.
Right.
They would show the same.
Yeah. And clearly that's not the case, that people died of other things in the all-cause mortality. Yeah, of course, yeah. But I mean, in some of the studies, the numbers are pretty similar, but in some of them they're not. It really depends on the study.
Okay.
But in many of the studies, the people were not very healthy, like they already had a heart attack, and so they're at pretty high risk for another one.
Yeah.
Okay, so I hope that makes sense in one possible interpretation of this pattern.
Yeah, for sure.
And the other interpretation is basically you just take the results as is and don't make any interpretation, and just say, okay, for the outcomes we care about, like death, we see no effect. So
why look at it further?
Yeah, like that's the most important outcome.
But I disagree.
You may. You are.
No, I think most
that's
people...
reasonable. Yeah.
Okay. Most people don't want to die.
But
most people also don't want to have heart attacks.
Yeah.
Even if it doesn't kill them.
Yeah, I think both would be pretty bad, but I'd rather have a heart attack and not die than... No, I know what you mean, yeah.
What you said about not interpreting the results further, if you had said it about just heart attacks, then I might agree. I might have an easier time agreeing with it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, to me, the all-cause mortality isn't that important, and you just showed why.
Yeah, I think if the studies were perfect and they were done for 40 years,
yeah,
maybe all-cause mortality would be what you want to look at.
Right.
Because there is some argument that, like, some people argue that saturated fat is actually good for you and it can reduce some other issues like dementia. So this is just an argument that has been out there from some people, that I'd rather die of a heart attack than dementia, something like that.
Okay.
It's just, people have arguments, but that is that in and of itself is a extrapolation and a story that.
Yeah, for sure.
And especially if we're just looking at this data, we don't have that information.
Okay, but I feel like we should.
Yeah. So we've just looked at these two meta-analyses in detail that looked at does reducing dietary saturated fat have an impact on these hard outcomes? Well, there's actually been multiple meta-analyses that have done this same kind of thing, and the problem is that there's not, as we just saw with even just these two, there's not a consistent conclusion on is there a benefit to reducing dietary saturated fat on these hard outcomes. So some meta-analyses say yes, there is a benefit. Some say there is not a benefit. So why is this happening? Why isn't there? And these are on the same, like there haven't been new randomized controlled trials on this for a while.
Okay.
The last one we saw was that 2016 one, which was actually done in 2008 or 9. And that was a small one that wasn't even included in Steen, so they actually didn't include that one.
Okay.
Basically what I'm saying is the group of trials hasn't changed.
So these are different meta-analyses on roughly the same RCTs coming to different conclusions based on the same numbers.
I wouldn't say the same numbers, I'd say the same trials.
Okay.
Because the problem is, why is there this lack of consistency?
Right.
And that is what we're going to discuss next time.
Excellent work.